sign looks very good. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
It's different enough.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome you to the second Seneca County Community Forum to address police reform and reinvention. My name is Bob McKeveny. I'm a Seneca County resident, a Seneca Falls resident, a retired superintendent of schools. And I'm serving tonight as the moderator and facilitator for tonight's forum. I would like to start by introducing Senator Pam Helming.
Thank you all. Thank you, Bob. I just wanted to say quickly a special thank you to Sheriff Tim Luce for inviting me to be here today. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Sheriff. And to everyone else who is participating, your feedback is invaluable. I know these gentlemen at the table here really appreciate hearing what's on your mind. So thank you all for being here. Sheriff, again, thanks to you.
Thanks, Senator Helming. So first and foremost, I would like to thank those that took time out of their busy schedules to be here tonight. We absolutely need input, information, and feedback from you to make this a process that is rich and meets the intended outcomes and goals of the police reform and reinvention. So let me identify some of the people here tonight so that you know who they are, and occasionally questions will be asked, and that some of these people will be answering them. So let me start by introducing Chief Stu Peenstra from the Seneca Falls Police Department. Lieutenant Tim Snyder from the Seneca Falls Police Department. Sheriff Tim Luce, Seneca County. Sheriff John Clear, Seneca County. Lieutenant Mike Shell, Seneca County. Lieutenant Tim Thompson, Seneca County. Chief Deputy Kim Goodwin, Seneca County. Jason Godley, Waterloo Police Department. Mark Singowitz, Seneca County District Attorney. Michael Miras, Seneca County Public Defender. Criminal Justice Advisory Board Chair. Deb Rickerson, Criminal Justice Advisory Board Member and Seneca County Probation. Deb is sitting in the back. She's the person who you're going to get surveys from at the end of the evening, so please remember to see her before you leave. Margaret Morse, Director of Community Services. Don Borland, Captain of the Correctional Facility. Mike Farrar, Seneca Falls Town Supervisor. Rich Richardson, Interlaken Mayor. And I also see Officer Denny, Seneca Falls Police Department. So I would like to start by thanking the Seneca Falls Community Center, specifically Supervisor Ferrara and Parks and Recreation Director Jim Spina for hosting us tonight. Thank you for letting us use the space. Bear with me.
Where's Ted when you need him, not Bob?
Well, he was working before. So, Margaret, you know where the gentleman's tech is?
Where's Jason? Jason? Yeah.
So while we're getting him, I'll continue on. So the next slide really talks about a big idea. It talks a lot about an existing principle in Seneca County that currently exists throughout the entire county regarding community-oriented policing. It's an important element in law enforcement reform planning, and really the idea, this becomes a recurring theme tonight through this process. how can we enhance this big idea? And we need to hear from you this evening and throughout the process. Seneca County law enforcement agencies are committed to the continual improvement process. So it really falls under the notion of we want to be good at one thing, getting better. And so we need your input for that. So Jason, I'm having trouble with this clicker here.
I'll just do it for you.
Okay, that's fine. So the next one really talks about the agenda, and we'll put the agenda on the screen so that you can follow along. We'll do our best to be prompt, keep this to an hour and 10 minutes tops. We also have participants that are watching live on Finger Lakes 1 and are also participating via Zoom. So those that are participating via Zoom, they are muted so as not to interfere with the audio of the presentation. However, they can participate by submitting questions on the chat feature of Zoom, and Margaret Morse will monitor that. She'll let me know if questions come up during the process. So we'd encourage you to participate as well. So, once we get past the agenda, and we'll go through these slides very quickly, we're not going to repeat ourselves. We really talk about some ground rules, and one of the ground rules are to appreciate and value input by county residents. Got it. Okay, so there you see the agenda. We're going to talk about some ground rules. We're going to overview the executive order. We're going to talk about those that are involved in this process. What are the roles and responsibilities of those involved, including the public? We're going to talk about the implementation approach and the timeline to complete this process. And then we'll talk about communication and then what's next. Nothing. I'm thinking it might be batteries on here. Can you advance it? So the executive order was signed by Governor Cuomo on June 12, 2020. And that executive order indicates that local government leaders are to convene their local police leaders to develop a reform plan that includes input, information, and feedback from community residents on a number of items. It's a 10-month process from June to April. And it started in June. The idea is to have it approved by April 1st and submitted to New York State. You'll see that the timeline that's in place in this county shows that the process hopefully will be completed and starting to be implemented by early 2021. Okay, and you can see that right there. So, okay, I'm on the next one. So the Seneca County process started with the county collaboration by law enforcement leaders and the Criminal Justice Advisory Board. That's not indicated in the executive order. So know that in this county, the law enforcement leaders came together to begin to organize around what's in this reform initiative. The process continues this week with 3 forums. We did one on Monday in Ovid. We're in Seneca Falls tonight. Tomorrow night we're in Waterloo. And this month, by residents completing surveys, which gives us the opportunity to get information from you that can be considered in the development of the plan. Even though it started as a county collaborative, each law enforcement agency will develop its own plan in its own municipality, containing county best practices, but also reflecting the culture of each community. So there are differences in each of the communities within this county. Those plans should reflect that for each of those communities. Okay, on the next one. So I'm going to read these because I know it's not easy to read the slides from the back, but this slide has the requirements of the executive order. The reform plan must address the following: the use of force by police officers, crowd management, community policing, implicit bias awareness training, procedural justice, de-escalation training and practices, law enforcement assisted diversion programs, community-based outreach and conflict resolution, a transparent, citizen complaint disposition procedure, hotspot policing, focused deterrence, crime prevention through environmental design, violence prevention and reduction interventions, and model policies and guidelines. So at any time throughout this process, if you have a question, need a clarification, don't hesitate to raise your hand. We'll make it interactive as best we can, and then the person that's best to respond to that will do so. So the intended outcomes of this reform plan development process are threefold: awareness, partnership, and funding. Increased awareness, increased partnership, and to maintain funding. And we talk about funding, there are some initiatives that are taking place in this county and will take place moving forward, and it's only fair that we get that level of funding in order to fund those initiatives within this county and that are identified in this reform plan. So as I said, it's a collaborative approach, and you see Seneca County right there. It was not required, but I dare say beneficial. It went above and beyond the executive order, and you can see on the screen the opt-in partners: the Seneca County Sheriff's Office, Seneca Falls Police Department, the Waterloo Police Department, and the Interlaken Police Department. There are 5 stakeholders, key stakeholders in this process. So we said the elected officials and law enforcement agencies, there are 2 we've already spoke to. But there are 3 others are critical components. The Criminal Justice Advisory Board, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as the oversight. The Criminal Justice Advisory Board Subcommittee, specifically to address police reforms. And then, as we said, general public forums and general public input. And you can see they're the opt-in partners. They also are committed to advancing the big idea that we put on the second slide about community-oriented policing. Their interest is to work with community residents and to have a continual improvement process. The Criminal Justice Advisory Board contains a lot of members. And what that basically said, there is a wide representation in Seneca County. So you can feel good that up and down the county, representation of all communities exists. So you can see that, and once again, if we need to get names from that, we certainly can share that with you. Somebody asked an Ovid the other night, are we going to be able to see the slides? Are the slides going to be posted? And the answer is yes. So at the end, we'll tell you how you can access the slides following Thursday's presentation at Waterloo. Once again, we also have the elected and appointed officials for each of the communities and New York State, and so they are very much part of this process. So all those stakeholders have roles and responsibilities, so we're going to start with municipal leadership. The local government leader is the one that's really responsible for the development and the presentation of the plan to the rest of the governing body. And that local leader is also required to submit that plan to New York State by April 1st, 2021. The law enforcement leadership, the second level there, is those are the people that are drafting the plan. That includes the required elements and includes residents' participation and input. The core working group is that subcommittee group, and that group is to ensure that the program, the reform program plan, is developed and executed in a collaborative manner. So once again, there are members of that group here. They're listening closely. They listened closely the other night and got some good ideas from the people in the audience. So once again, at any time, if you have something that you'd like to ask or share or clarify, we certainly can do that. So as we continue with that, we have the entire Criminal Justice Advisory Board, and as we said, their job is the oversight of this 10-month process. They are the ones to assure the plan is representative of the community. And as we said, there's 4 opt-in partners that they're looking at those 4 plans. Stakeholder groups are ambassadors of the project to the community. They're all the people that exist in the community, all the different groups become the stakeholder groups. They provide input towards recommendations. So as plans are developed and shared, you'll continue to provide input and additional recommendations before that final plan is developed. So that becomes critically important in the general public. They're the people that we need that information and input from. And that's a perfect segue to the next slide. So if you can look at the quote in the brown box there, in order to make this reform plan development and changes happen, we need people to attend the forum, so we thank you tonight. But once again, if there's people that you know that maybe couldn't make it tonight, you certainly can tell them to come to Waterloo tomorrow night. And Jason, it's at the Fire Hall in Waterloo tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Encourage them to go. We want people to complete the survey. We have hard copies tonight. Before we're done, we're going to tell you how to get the survey online, complete online. And we've had great response so far, so we need to continue to have community input in that way. We need greater awareness, as we said earlier, as one of the intended outcomes of policies, procedures, cultural issues, marginalized members of the community. Maybe those people who feel they don't have a voice. We want to be able to know what are their thoughts. And you may be representing constituent groups. So that becomes really important as well. The goal is to develop a reform plan that meets the needs and interests of each community. So let's go on to the timeline. So I know you can't see that. I said we're going to make these available, but basically what's happened in July and August, we said that's where the law enforcement agencies have organized. They've created this Seneca County Collaborative, which goes above and beyond the executive order. September, where we are now, we're looking for resident input and feedback. We're providing presentations and encouraging residents to share information. October will be the time to review the results, review the things that were said at each forum, review the data from the surveys, and really say what becomes representative that needs to go into our plans to address the required elements that we talked about earlier. November is plan development time with representative and required elements. So you can see, as I said that, you'll see where the Criminal Justice Advisory Board, the subcommittee working group, will be working with law enforcement leaders to craft those plans and put them together. The goal is, hopefully by December, to be presenting those plans to government bodies. So that come early 2021, these become operational plans that we start to implement, because the interest is moving forward. The interest is not completing a task and saying, okay, we're done. The interest is to move forward with best practices that are evident in the reform plan. So the idea is, once this is done, for law enforcement agencies and municipalities to share the operational plans with the community. Yes?
In December, should we expect additional public forums of feedback then?
So that's a great question. So if you didn't hear it, the gentleman asked if we can expect additional forums later on. Chief Feenstra.
Yes, absolutely. Each agency is going to hold their own forum, probably be in the same locations, I'm guessing. At least I know mine will be here. And we're going to present our plan.
So starting broad, going to kind of filter down within each community. So great question. Thank you.
Can I just say one more?
Yes.
So, you know, Bob had mentioned that in December we're going to start implementing it beginning in January. Based on our review of our agency and many of the agencies here and what we're looking at with the executive order, many of us, not all of us, have already made adjustments to our department. So we're not waiting until January 1st to make adjustments. We're recognizing some things that needed to be adjusted, and we're adjusting now. That'll be presented. So my plan is to say what our department was doing before, explain the executive order and their demands of the executive order, and then what we're doing to change. Some of those things we can do now. Some we have to wait for the community feedback to look at everything and maybe recognize some things that we're not seeing that the community can help us out with.
So a common practice for law enforcement agencies is to revise policies. So Chief, maybe talk about that a little bit.
So, for instance, our use of force policy, that has been changed in 2000, since 2013, it's been changed 6 different times with our agencies throughout the year. So that's something that we've been doing. That is something that's a model policy based off New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services. And we've implemented that as a model policy. There's all sorts of other critical policies that they consider for New York State. All our policies, Seneca County, Waterloo, I believe, they're all based off the model policy of New York State. And they're a living document. So anytime a change occurs, or we get updates from New York State DCJS, we implement that change into our policy. We don't wait until, let's say, something bad happens. We try to stay ahead of the game.
Thank you. Anybody else? So this, next slide, Margaret, thank you. So the next slide talks about what's in the scope of the initiative. So basically it says, participating law enforcement agencies agreed to include the following items. Community interaction has to be evident in their plans. Operational policies and procedures, as the chief just said. Recruitment practices, training, transparency and accountability, and equality and social justice. Those are agreements that need to be included. So you can see that right here. And once again, this is kind of where we are to get some of that information back and forth now and in follow-up forum. So that's in the scope of the initiative, Leah.
Yeah, my question is, Chief Pincher, you talked about like implementing policy changes now. Like when you look at that list, what are some of the things, like I as a community person, I'm aware of trainings and things, but not trainings that maybe the officers are available to. So like, is there training on how to approach somebody who's on the spectrum, like autism training? Is there training to like be able to talk to someone who's transgendered and what that kind of, like, I don't know what kind of policies you have, but as a community person, like, that's some of my interests, and I would like to know what some of them are.
There is. So we have mandatory training on all those topics that you just spoke of that we take each year. Every single department member does. Training of recruitment. That's something that in my next forum I'm going to explain to everybody, because I don't think a lot of people understand what a person has to go through to even become a police officer. All the standards that they have to meet. It doesn't mean that we're going to get the perfect person every single time, and we recognize that, but there's also probationary periods and field training and all these different things to make sure that if we do happen to get a bad apple, we can get rid of that bad apple, because as we know, one is a bad thing in law enforcement. It's really not tolerable. So my plan, and I think everyone else's plan, is to go through some of those things, explain the process, explain what it entails for a citizen to file a complaint against a police officer, and what we do with that. You know, so thinking that, well, if I file a complaint, nothing's going to happen with it anyway. Well, that's not true. We look deeply into these things and make sure, because we're not perfect. And there are some things maybe we do need additional training on, because we handle a lot of different things. So, you know, the more training we can have, the better, but, you know, we have to continuously keep up on these things, because we're throwing so many different things.
Great comment. Leah, I don't know if this speaks to part of your question or not, but I just wanted to mention it's SIT training, crisis intervention training. It's a program that happens within law enforcement. I've seen, and what it basically does, it brings law enforcement officials together with mental health officials, social work people, parole, corrections. It brings everyone together, and they do this cross training to talk about how to deal with those issues you're talking about, right? And it's been a phenomenal training program. And I've seen Seneca County lead the charge and really reach out, and Margaret's been involved as well in working with other counties. So Seneca County will train with Ontario County or with Wayne County, and they'll share resources. I've been to a few of the graduation ceremonies, stopped into a few of the classes. I think it's absolutely incredible. It's something that I think everyone would agree we need more of. The problem is that since 2018, the state funding for that program has decreased dramatically. Now, to their credit, in Seneca County, Wayne County, and Ontario County, they found the resources to keep this going, right? To pool their resources, what they have, and they continue to keep it going. But if there's a case to be made, and if you have people who want to fight for something specific, it's to restore the funding. Put more funding into SIT training because it's really effective and important.
So thank you, Leah. It also goes back to the earlier slide that said implicit bias awareness training is a required element. So to take that even further is to say, what are the trainings moving forward that will allow us to deal with bias awareness? So thank you for asking that. So we have, we're very fortunate that we have what we believe is the best practice in Seneca County. We have a strong existing supportive partnership between law enforcement and mental health so that responses to situations, which are all different and unique for every one of them, can be appropriate. So we feel real strongly about that, and you just heard the Senator talk about crisis intervention teams. And so you can see right there, and like I said, we'll post those, but it also says that partnership allows us to increase our connections to community resources, provide specialized mental health training for officers, reduce repeat encounters with law enforcement, and then minimize arrests and reduce the use of force in encounters. So once again, that's a rich history that's been in place here, thanks to both departments coming together, and they believe strongly in that. And as the Senator said, even absent funding, they found a way to forge forward and make that work. So we need to build off the positive, and that's positive. So this is not in the scope of the initiative, the reform plan initiative. Implementation changes to civil service, judicial and the court system, economic disparities, healthcare disparities, housing disparities, educational disparities, mental health and social services disparities. These are state initiatives that don't fall under the realm of this executive order. So, So, the next slide talks about success criteria and assumptions. So in order for this to be successful, we need stakeholder and community resident participation. We also need a collaborative environment, accepting of change and improvement. And as I said earlier, that whole recurring theme really talks that we want to be good at one thing, getting better. And so once again, if we embrace that continual improvement process, then we can have a successful reform plan put into place. So, as I said, this is the second of 3 community forums. The next one is tomorrow night at the Waterloo Fire Hall. The best thing you can do when you leave here, encourage a few people to go to that so we can spread the word. And over those 3, there will be enough people that heard it, and then we'll play the game Pass It On so that more people hear. Yes, or
Are those forums only for the people in that specific community?
I don't believe so, but I'll tell you, sure.
Open to everybody in Seneca County.
Thank you.
So if someone's busy tonight, they're free tomorrow night, they can go to Waterloo. So, okay. So we're asking everyone to complete the survey. We need community input. Then the development of the local plan, draft. Then there's a review and a revision process. And the final plan presented to the local legislature for approval, submittal to New York State after the approval, and then ongoing implementation. Increased awareness, increased partnerships, as we said earlier, intended outcomes. Here are survey questions that we're going to ask you to respond to when you take the survey. It says, how effective is your local law enforcement at combating crime in your neighborhood? How do you view your local law enforcement? How well does your local law enforcement conduct community policing? And reference the slide that talks about what community policing actually is. What does your local law enforcement do well? What, if anything, does your local law enforcement need to improve? What more would you like your law enforcement agency to offer the community? So once again, open-ended questions that allow you to really be specific in some of your feedback to this process. Lori?
Can we have extra surveys to bring with us to give to people who cannot make it to the
Absolutely. Yes.
forum?
Absolutely. So Deb, you have plenty back there?
I have several surveys, as well as attached to the survey is my name and my address as far as where to return the surveys to.
So if you didn't hear, she also has the return address where you can send it back to. So can we also speak to how that survey is accessible online?
Yes, so the surveys are going to be posted, they're on the Sheriff's Office website, they're also on the Seneca Falls Police Department's website, Interlincoln, each of the police jurisdictions, you can go right online, fill it out, it's collected in a database, so we'll be able to collect the data until October 10th will be the deadline for taking the survey, and then thereafter we'll be sitting down and reviewing the data, and then the results will be posted. I'm hoping, my goal is to shoot for the end of the month on the county website, so we can review.
So once again, based on the amount of responses that have occurred already this week, which is in the hundreds, it gives them 2 weeks to compile open-ended responses into some kind of format that they can post back out and share with the community. So give it about 2 weeks after October 10th, and about the last week of October somewhere, just you can check, it'll be posted off of that website. Okay? Yes, Lori?
I tried to access the survey online, and there are glitches in it.
Okay.
And all of my answers, it's just at one point, the whole thing just disappeared. Have those issues been addressed so that it runs more smoothly now?
Lori, do you know which site you used?
I went through Facebook.
Okay. Okay.
I guess I'm not aware of any glitches, because when I checked this morning, there were responses as of today, so,
This was on a Facebook post, and so I went to it, and I was able to start the survey, and then next thing I know, all of my answers disappeared, and then the whole survey just disappeared.
So first of all, apologies, because that's like the most frustrating thing, is to do that and then lose it. So it's being clunky. I guess the immediate response would be, go to the law enforcement website as your go-to site to do that, or take a hard copy, and then you know it's going to be entered once you submit the hard copy. So, Lori, sorry that happened.
And
Thank you.
And we'll just test them all again too, just
Okay.
to make sure. So
Thank you.
thank you for letting us know.
Yeah, that's perfect. So at this point, we want to open it up to questions. You may have more specific questions about reform plan initiatives or reforms in general. We'd be happy to field those. Yes,
I carry a number of questions.
That's fine.
One at a time.
yes.
After 10 months, and assuming this all works out and there's legislative changes and approvals, is there an ongoing process where the committee will remain involved with the law enforcement initiative?
Great question.
We didn't get that far yet. I do know that, like, the chief's website and my website, that there's always a way for you to respond to us, either positively or negatively, on our website. There's two directly. But that's something we should talk about maybe with the Criminal Justice Advisory Committee, and talk about having maybe forums every year or annually at least, only because, the same as I said last night, I think this is an awesome opportunity for law enforcement, because there's a lot of smart people in this county, and they're going to come up with some ideas that maybe are not real hard to do, that would make law enforcement much better. And I applaud that, and I look forward to any ideas. That's why I think that the more surveys we have, the better we're going to get information.
That's a great recommendation, so thank you for bringing it up.
We can't emphasize enough how gratifying it is to just see the faces of law enforcement without lights flashing or anything. And to have that on an ongoing basis, I think is a community commitment as a community member.
And that could be be what part of the plan itself.
I hope it'll be on my board, and again, I'll hold questions if there are others, but I have a bunch.
Okay.
Now, if I could add to that a little bit, first of all, I want to thank everyone on behalf of the town of Seneca Falls for coming tonight and participating. Special thanks for Senator Hellman taking time out of her busy schedule. A follow-up to that is, as you probably caught, the municipal leader's name is on the bottom line. I have to submit for the town of Seneca Falls the reform plan and the different municipalities. So I can only speak for myself, but once the plan is in place, that will be part of our annual, reform movement and annual observations of our police force from my perspective as a town supervisor and leader of the town board. So again, we'll continue to monitor that and make sure, for lack of a better term, hold their feet to the fire. This is what we're doing, and then we need to keep doing that type of thing. But great question.
Yeah, that slide that says community-oriented policing forges ties with the community, then having the ability to interact goes a long way towards that. So, anybody else? Yes.
Didn't have a senior. I noticed fine group of people. Thank you for your work. I see people that, for the most part, in this community, stay out of trouble. I don't see the people that are probably going to cause you the most problems and concerns. So I guess my question is, how do you go into Peterman Apartments and find out? You're not going to ask them what they want. You might ask them what they need. I'm concerned what kind of answers you're going to get, and that's probably where the bad publicity comes from when they push your buttons. What are you going to do about that? Thank you.
You can see my reaction here.
So, Margaret?
Sure, and then I'll refer to others, but I do want to share that we did, as a committee, we were strategic in some ways in where we placed surveys in order to ensure that people who marginalized members of our population would have access and we would get their feedback. So, and we did, in the mental health center, we made the surveys available to our clientele. We provided them to the drop-in center in Seneca Falls, and I know the House of Concern. So we really did sort of target specific areas where we felt we could reach people who, because of disability or illness, mental illness or substance abuse, find themselves engaged with law enforcement, because we want their feedback. That's really important to us. So maybe that answers your question a little bit.
It's kind of a gray area. It's an area that can be tough to address because sometimes you don't know what they're going to do. But yeah, thank you.
I don't know if this helps answer your question a little bit. My name is Robert Shields, and I'm an alcoholic and drug addict, and I'm part of the Criminal Justice Advisory Board. I do have a bad, somewhat criminal background. So, my mind is more on the criminal side than the law enforcement side, but I still get in trouble lately. So, I don't know if that helps your question or not. I'm part of both committees, the subcommittee and the Criminal Justice Advisory Board.
Are there still food drives going on? Are there still food drives going on? Because that's another avenue to potentially get a mass number of, mass number of surveys out as fast as possible.
Yeah, but those are over.
I know that
I think there's still some on the
Dolores-
south side, right?
Is there?
Yes,
Dolores,
every other week.
she did it.
Oh, there you go.
I do know that Dolores did, from the House of Concern, did put surveys in everybody's box
Oh, good.
for them to be returned to her, and then I would reach out to her and she would provide me with the surveys. I did speak with her today. She has not had any surveys returned, but she did put them in all the food boxes.
So there is an interest in including those people. I think the question is well received, and so we need to really think about
Well, I guess
how
I'm
can we
not
get
that
information from those people. They're welcome, we want to hear from them. I agree with you, they don't come.
They're not coming here now.
Right, exactly. So how do we go there? And once again, it speaks to your question earlier for forums and being able to listen. Doesn't mean a forum has to be in this room right here. It can be outside somewhere. So anyway, point well taken. Yes.
Who are you considering to be the marginalized citizens?
I don't know, you want me to answer that, or?
Yes, you were the one.
Sure,
saying marginalized.
so I'm speaking specifically about people in our community with disabilities that are treated by services such as mental health services or substance abuse treatment services. There are other marginalized developmental disabilities as well. So those are the three populations that I have responsibility over and that I would consider marginalized. We have a different sort of community with members who are marginalized in different ways than in urban areas. And certainly people with those disabilities in those three areas are marginalized, stigmatized in our community.
So you were able to get surveys out to those with developmental disabilities?
They were provided to Mosaic.
Yes.
So they would have opportunity. I don't know whether anyone responded. Yep.
Yes.
Are the advisory board meetings public and posted?
The minutes, you can record all those minutes and submit them to Debbie Rickerson, and then we would be able to take those that way.
Is there a reason they're not public?
As the minutes themselves,
No, the meetings.
for the meetings, that's just the committee
Yeah.
themselves. We have members that are required to attend these meetings. Or if there's other members that are wanting to attend on a regular basis.
There's a really old saying in
Might
the
provide a
development.
little bit more insight.
There's an old saying in developmental disabilities work that no meeting without me without you. And if there's work that's going on that's helping people who are on the short end of the stick, you know, this I think also addresses the question, how do people find out what's really going on? And I'm not, there may be other reasons why it's not open to the public, but that's already sounds like an accessibility issue. You wanted to say something?
Well, some of what we talk about deals with individuals, and there's some confidentiality issues. But there's other times when we could probably open it up to the public, and I see everyone around the table nodding that maybe we should consider.
Please do. It gives a lot of credibility to people.
Hopefully that answers your question. Personnel related, not open to the public. Non, I think you've begged the question to say, could other parts of it be open?
And this comes from outside. Someone asked me to bring this in too.
Sure.
You know, one of the things we hear about in the news all is when there are abusive use of force. And is there any law enforcement representative that doesn't have some tracking mechanism and accountability system?
So let me repeat it so everybody heard. Do these law enforcement agencies have tracking mechanisms for use of force for when it has to occur? How do they handle that? Chief.
So, I know myself, I believe the rest of the departments, all use of force reports go all the way up to the top, which would be my office, the sheriff's office, Chief Godley's office, and back down. So, you mentioned about tracking use of forces, right? And let's say we have an officer that have more than others, right? So fortunately, I recognize the software system. The town board was fortunate enough to support it with me. And now I've purchased the software, recognizing that, you know, without a really good pen and paper and board and constantly looking at every single little detail, I may miss something. Now I just recently purchased a software product that now will alert me if a particular officer has X amount of use of forces within a certain amount of time. It'll tell me whether it was male, female, black, white, you name it. It'll provide data back to me so I can better track our officers' use of forces, when they are, what they did, how they did it, what was the purpose. Everything now will be tracked on the software platform and at my fingertips.
I see nodding heads. Is that true for all the groups represented?
I would like to add that too. It's good because we do track it, number one. Number two, we have a professional conduct unit, and quite often we investigate use of forces. Very often we get investigated. We also are now mandated to actually report to the state that we use of force.
I'm not making an accusation. I'm asking a little concern.
No, it's a good question. Because I'll be honest with you, I recognized after the executive order that I didn't have a very good, we were doing all of our use of force reports, they were coming up all the way up to my desk, back down again, and then we were submitting them into the case file, and there they sat. We track them with a spreadsheet the lieutenant does, of the officer and everything, but unless you're sitting there and looking at that thing and really analyzing it, you could miss something easily. I brought it to the attention of the town board, and they were very supportive, 5-0 vote in approval of getting this software system so we can better track not only use of force incidents, but all of our training. Every single bit of our training is going to be tracked from the time that officer starts at the police department to the end of his career. So if anyone wanted to ever know how much time we spend on the range a year, how much time if an officer's CIT training, we talk about CIT training a lot, crisis intervention training, if an officer's trained in that, when an officer's taser training is up and they need to recertify, it alerts you. It's going to be all on one platform, right at my fingertips, to be able to access and the rest of the department involved.
We'd be surprised to have a community member say, this guy or gal has been involved 5 times. That should be a surprise.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? So you could go with a spurt, right, where the justified use of force could happen with a particular officer 3 times in a month, right? And then they may go 3 years without using that force again. It's based on the situation. We don't want to, right? It's what the situation brings to us.
Something Sheriff Luce added to our use of force policy is a duty to act. So when one of our officers witnesses another officer using excessive force, they must intervene and stop it and report it.
Very reassuring. I had what I hope will be your last question.
I'm going to let Melissa jump in, and then we'll go back to you, Melissa.
So there's a lot of different places that have implemented that as well, and in some of those incidences, the person who does actually do the intervening is forced out in some obscure way, or, you know, there's ways that, you know, the blue kind of huddle around each other and then force those ones that really do want to stand up, they really do want the best thing, to actually be the ones that leave. How are you going to prevent that? And what are the mechanisms for actually filing a report? So I feel you know, it was a abuse of force for me. How do I actually say, I think it was an abuse of force? Where's somebody go to do that anonymously? Because, you know, nobody wants to be tracked down or repeatedly pulled over because somebody, you know, perceives some sort of slight against them. I know of people that would like to do possibly making some sort of comment and they're afraid. So how do people go about doing that so that they feel safe doing it and can encourage other people to say a bad thing, a good thing, you know, this thing helped and it was nice?
So before they respond, Melissa, on one of the screens it said, this reform plan must have a transparent citizen complaint procedure. And so I'll let them respond to what goes on now, but obviously it's a required element, so they'll build on what they have.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I know the sheriff's office right now on our website, if you look down there, there's comments to the sheriff. It can be done anonymously.
Okay.
You can say about how great this one officer did, or you can say how terribly he treated you.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes directly to me in an email.
Yeah.
And I put it into a PCU investigation, professional conduct investigation.
Okay.
And usually it goes to my investigators, Lieutenant Thompson, and they investigate it from that point. So, I mean, it goes on.
After that point, though, what happens, like, let's say
Well,
it's
it's the
not...
same as any case, you have to have evidence. You gotta remember, we're bound under civil service. So, I mean, I still, if I could just fire somebody for accusations, I wouldn't.
No, absolutely,
You see what I'm
absolutely.
saying? So, I mean, we have to build a case.
But
So,
nationally, what we're seeing is a lot of these things that a lot of people perceive as kind of a use of force, where, you know, right here in Rochester, we had a gentleman die that was having a mental health crisis. If you're running in the middle of the street at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's probably something wrong, other than alcohol. But that there were other officers that stood and did nothing, but what, I don't want to see that be something that we have to deal with as a community, because we've got a lot going for us already. I just want to make it go further, like, as do all of you. So if you're not satisfied, I guess, if you're not satisfied that your complaint was taken seriously, where does it go from there? Because I think that's a lot of people's concern as well. They investigated themselves and they didn't do anything wrong. And that's what you hear a lot of, is they did it themselves and they're done.
There's 2 points here that I think people need to understand. One is the folks at that table are the leaders of each of their respective departments. And I believe as a leader of the department, they may be a police officer, but as a leader, their primary goal is to make sure that their department does the best that they possibly can. And I think we have to entrust the leaders that they're going to do the most thorough investigation that they possibly can, because as leaders, it's a reflection on them. And if they try to hide things, that's certainly a reflection on them. But I understand completely what you're saying, and that's one of the components of this reform movement, is some type of citizen advisory group that will also have the ability to not necessarily hand out discipline, but also look into and examine the facts of a complaint type of thing. And hopefully between our leadership and some type of advisory committee, then things like the perception that the big blue wall doesn't happen.
And that's, I think, the biggest thing is that there's that perception of it. And even if it's not present in our communities, it's nationally, you know, that's what we're seeing.
So I think the supervisor, the leadership has got to be in control of that. And if you've got 4 leaders, then you're probably going to get exactly what you're talking about. I can attest to everybody at this table right now that is not happening in this county. If you file a complaint with our office, you'll get a letter from the chief that states that your complaint has been received. It turns into an internal investigation, which then in turn comes to my desk. And then I start pulling body camera, I start interviewing, I knock on people's doors. And then you'll get a letter stating what it found. Yeah, what if it's unfounded, founded, or we're taking it to another step.
Well, the other thing is, our department works very closely with our attorney at Albany, and we also, if it has anything to do with criminal, we turn it over to the district attorney to review it and see if there's anything that
what else to do
further and go from there. So I mean, we turn it right over.
Yeah.
I mean, I have nothing.
No, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything.
But I know,
just
the process.
Yeah.
Just one more piece to add to that too, is the 3 of us are also board members of the Law Enforcement Academy that's run at Hopewell. So we're part of the training of new officers and the curriculum and what's being taught. So part of that teaching in the use of force is the component that all of us have in our use of force policies, which is if something's going wrong, you have a duty to act and respond and stop what's going on, correct it, and report it. So that is relatively new in the curriculum. So that is something that's going to start trickling down now to the new officers that are coming on.
And retraining of...
And retraining is going on with the new policies that are coming out. We just got one in September from DCJS that guides us as to where these policies are supposed to go. Once we get those done and enacted, it's our responsibility to then train our officers existing in those new policies where that's stated, to kind of, open up the transparency, as you would say, so it looks a little more fluid, that we're not protecting our own, that we are doing these things. And all our agencies basically operate the same way, with a complaint being generated, brought into the department, it gets investigated, and, we take action. We don't want bad apples, right? We've seen it. One bad apple ruins the whole department, right? So we're just as critical of our own guys, and every person at this table, I can attest to her that way. We want to make sure we're giving the residents of Seneca County the best law enforcement agencies that we can give to you guys. We work very, very hard to ensure that. And we're always changing, trying to make sure that happens.
So Melissa, I think you asked a really important question too, because it's safe to do it anonymously. But really, how can you feel safe by stepping forward and filing that complaint yourself?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're asking, and that needs to be taken into consideration in a reform plan. So let's go to Leah and then Margaret.
So, two things. One is, I'm just curious, and I guess in part of this transparency, does this new software or this new system allow for a search, like if someone comes in from somewhere else, like is there a cross-reference? Because in clergy, like historically, and it doesn't happen now because there are things in place, but historically, bad clergy would just get popped around into somebody else's problem, and they were like, we don't have to deal with it anymore, thank God. And they thought that was a holy act, right? It's not. It was the opposite, right? It wasn't transparent. It continued to provide hurtful things in other ways. So I guess one is, I wonder if that's not being thought about, how do we ensure that that doesn't happen, whether they get passed around between Seneca Falls and Waterloo and then the county or outward to another area. So is there tracking for that? The other thing, and I'm not sure if it's encapsulated in here, but y'all are lovely. There's not a lot of diversity amongst you. So, there's not a lot of diversity amongst us either. So I just wonder, and by diversity, interpret it as broadly or as narrowly as you would like, but is there an active, about recruitment or whatever? I don't really know the recruitment process, so is there an active thing to get a more communal representation? Is that something we look for in terms of developing law enforcement agents?
You answered a lot of questions.
I did. Bruce, come on, you talk to me. You know I asked a lot.
Only question.
DCPS, Department of Criminal Justice Services, has records of all their certified classes that we take. Like when you become a police officer, when you become a breathalyzer operator, things like that. They also, if I had an officer who I was disciplining and we let him go because of discipline, he would lose, I can take away his certification. He would not be a police officer. And the only way he'd be a police officer in other areas if he scored on the test, got hired again, went all the way through basics because he wouldn't have a certification. That's the same as if somebody leaves, we're starting an investigation, and they leave before I can go after him for his wrongdoing or whatever. His certification can be taken away. So there is some processes through DC Division of Criminal Justice Services to take away their certifications if they're to stop them from going to another department.
So who would like to respond to the recruitment question?
Well, just another part of that real quick. So when they apply to us, I know all agencies have to sign paper that allows us to access all their records. Financial records, personnel records, anything that we need to get access to, and we're doing those backgrounds. All three agencies are going to do a very, very thorough job digging into backgrounds to see what it is that goes on. I know I personally go to departments and pulled the jackets of officers that we're looking at. I can get into their personnel files. I can see any of the issues that are having, all the way up to other agencies in Ontario and Wayne counties. So we make them sign that as part of their application process. You're going to sign this form so we can get into all your information to see what it is that they have and prevent any bad hires.
It's a saying, don't make your problem my problem.
And as for the recruitment, we are governed by civil service, which means that we get people take a test. We will get a certified list from personnel, and it's pretty strict. We'll get a list. Here's the top 3. You have to pick one of them. And then it'll actually work from the highest scores down to the lowest. So there's not a lot of control over going after trying to recruit particular groups, because it all depends on how they score on that test and where they are on that test. And that's civil service law, we don't have any control over.
There's something that might need to be revisited. In my former life, when I was in education, at Waterloo, we tried to hold recruitment fairs for students of diversity, women, or female students, and brought in police force, EMTs, fire department, et cetera, to try to expose different groups of kids to different types of careers that we're talking about. So that might be something that needs to be revisited at a county level to do something like that. Because if you don't spike their interest early, it might be too late.
Yeah, Deb could probably speak to Law Day, because we actually do something very similar here in the county, in which we bring kids in and they spend a day with a variety of probation, and so they do, or law enforcement, they have opportunities to do something very similar to that. So we are kind of doing that. I did want to, and Deb may want to speak more to that if she wants it, but I did want to speak to the mental health issue, because you did bring up the situation in Rochester. And I just wanted to reiterate that here in Seneca County, we are unique in that without funding, our law enforcement leadership has chosen to go on and get training for individuals. Caitlin and Under Sheriff Clear are both actually CIT trainers. And the goal in this community is for us to be self-sustaining and self-sufficient in getting the 40 hours of specialized mental health, crisis de-escalation, CIT training to every officer, law enforcement officer in our county. So that's pretty unique.
So Leah, I just may add, in my role as a superintendent, occasionally we would petition civil service to send notifications out to other areas to try to attract people into this area. So that's something the advisory board can take under consideration as well, to kind of create a broader net, to kind of recruit, because that has to be part of this plan as well. So let's take two more and then wrap it up, and then we'll hang around in case there are additional questions.
Where is the state police in this?
Okay. Mike.
They're doing it on a state level. Their review is at a state level.
But they're involved on a county level from time to time.
They are, but this review process is happening on a state. That's why they didn't join this team.
Is there a plan in this plan to coordinate what's going on here with what's going on there?
Well, I know the state police, their mission statement is not to come in and take over law enforcement. They're there to assist local law enforcement, so they're going to assist us in any way that we want them to assist. So that's what their mission statement states.
Let's go one more. Anybody?
I don't have a question.
Yes.
But I have something to say. I have lived in Seneca Falls for most of my life, and I can tell you, there were 3 incidents that I have to praise the police officers for. Because, 1, they saved my son's life. So, without them and without Officer Poole, my son would not be standing here today. So I want to say thank you. He's done a complete turnaround in his life, and I have to say, it's because of them. Part of them.
So let's go back to that recurring theme, community policing, making ties with the community members. So thanks for reinforcing that. So let's do this. We're going to hang around. If you have additional questions for any of the panel, let's just revisit the fact that we have hard copy surveys with Deb Rickerson in the back. She also has the little post-it on there that you know where you can send it back to. Please take one for yourself, one for a neighbor, and also share the information about tomorrow. We're also going to post the slides probably starting next week. What website? The county website. There'll be a link to be able to see the slides if you want to share them with other people that couldn't make it, okay? So we say thank you for taking time out of your schedule, coming out, and look forward to having you hang around and ask a few more questions. Thank you.